Okay, welcome to CE 526. We're starting this lecture by talking about the field assessment of traffic safety. Okay, so that's basically how do we do field assessment? We do it using the road safety audit process. So that's one of the ways of doing field safety or field assessment of road safety. And that gets to a reactive versus proactive approach, right? A reactive safety approach would be that you do your screening, you define the problem, and then you identify an implementation of the countermeasures. And in the reactive approach, we very much rely on the crash data. We want crash data to be as long-term as possible. And then a proactive approach is basically you try to identify problems before they occur and going to the field and taking a user's perspective and looking for problems as part of the road safety audit process that we do. It is a proactive approach to traffic safety identification or traffic safety issues identification. Obviously, reactive approach have their limitations. You've heard me talk about these high crash locations before improvement plans may be developed. Crash data is often dated, incomplete, or insufficient. I think some of those things came up in our guest lecture discussion as well, where visitors from Transsoft talked about this. It may also be more costly since improvement plans are necessarily implemented and not already built and open to the public. So then if you have to do construction and things like that on that, then that's more problematic, more inconvenience for everybody, more expensive for everybody. So proactive approach focuses on evolving science of safety. So what is known about safety implications of highway design and operation decisions, and we try to look for those problems from a user's perspective before we even hand over the road, or even sometimes, we do it on existing roads as well. As I told you, the road safety audit process originated as a process for roads that are not yet in operation or they're just about to be open to the public. But now road safety audit, because some of these older design may not have had human factors completely in mind, that's why it's sometimes beneficial to look for that user's perspective, even on existing roads. So road safety audit is a formal examination of existing or future road. So existing or future road or traffic project or any project that interacts with road users. And it's an independent, so generally the road safety audit process should be implemented by the agency, but it should be conducted by a team of independent experts. Okay, and right away I see it should be crash potential. So because I'm in a Google Doc, I'm going to just go ahead and make that change here, call it crash potential. And safety performance. So road safety audit is a formal examination. It's done by an independent qualified examiner, and it's restricted to safety issues. So we just focus on safety issues and not necessarily on the operation issue. So this is just a quick flow chart from Federal Highway Administration that talks about the whole process. And what it does is it has responsibilities assigned to it. If you see a blue square on one of these circles on part of the process, then the blue square is responsibility of the road safety audit team. And if you see a gray triangle, that is the responsibility of the design team or the project owner. So identify project or existing road for road safety audit. So that was sort of like, so you can think of like the project that you did. I hope you can sort of see me as sort of the design team or a project owner or whatever. And then you could see yourself as the audit team. So you are the independent audit team and I'm sort of the design team, or like, so I'm the person who maybe designed it, or I'm the person who's asking you to evaluate it. So I might be the agency. So you can think of me as an agency participant who is recruiting you as an independent team to do the road safety audit that you just conducted. So identify project or existing road for road safety audit, select the multidisciplinary RSA team, and then conduct startup meeting to exchange information. So that's where you sort of think about, and here is what happens is that if we were on the field, I will take you to the field myself, and I'll sort of familiarize you all with the details of the site. I typically, as a design owner or a design team or a project owner, I will have access to the design drawings and stuff like that if there is a specific project I want you to look at. And then you could see number 4 and number 5 are your team's responsibility. So you perform the field reviews under various conditions, and then you conduct the road safety analysis and prepare a report for findings. So that's sort of your responsibility that you've already undertaken. I did not ask you to do a report, but but you're basically doing a presentation that's one of the reports. So and then you're presenting the findings today. So we are doing that step together. So we're doing project 6, and then a project owner or design team prepares the formal response and then incorporate the findings into the project where appropriate. So 7, 8 is basically completely the responsibility of the design team or the project owner. So we are sort of in this exercise, we're going through step 1 through 6. We couldn't quite do as good of a job of step 3 because we are in virtual environment and everybody's sort of doing different locations. And I did not have all the information that a road safety audit team might need, like the design drawings and all that handy for me. And that process could get pretty cumbersome. But I did provide you with the basic outlines of the information. And then you guys did step 4 and 5, which hopefully are now completed. And then we are going through the step 6 right after we're done here. Sometimes it's helpful to recognize things as what they're not, right? So road safety audit process is not a means of rating or ranking a project. You're not comparing different projects or different locations. It's not a check against compliance of standards. It's not a crash investigation. You're not trying to look at a specific crash that happened, and you don't want to just look at that piece and try to investigate why that crash happened. You're looking proactively, not looking reactively at all. And it's not a redesign. You're not recommending wholesale redesign of certain location. So sometimes the question come up that, hey, if everything is designed to the design standards, why do we need audits? So first of all, that assumption might be incorrect. So sometimes there might be things that assumption might be incorrect because some things may be designed, existing roads may be designed to old standards. So they might not meet standards anymore. So that's one reason. The other reason could be that, and that we've talked about in the class many times over, the application of the standards and guidelines does not assure that adequate safety is provided. Because if you just meet the standards and guidelines, all you're doing is you're providing nominal safety, right? And in this class, we talk about substantive safety that basically works on a spectrum rather than a step function where you either meet the standards, so you're safe, or you don't meet the standard, you're unsafe. That's not how it works. Standards are developed for many purposes, some of which do not contribute to enhanced safety. So that's another reason. And then standards provide a framework to initiate the design. They might be out of date, not applicable to the circumstances of design, and may not address the human factors. You might recall we talked about human factors in this class as well. So they might not adhere to the human factors aspect also. So they might not be looking at user as the focal point. So this is the information that typically is provided to the road safety audit team: the plan, the drawings, the design standards, and traffic volumes and crash record, just to orient for what issues they should be looking at, right? But sometimes that might create a little problem because sometimes, so you have to be careful. So when you look as a road safety audit team, when you look at background information, sometimes that could cause some problems because it could bias you towards looking for issues that were associated with those crash records. So you have to be very careful when you examine the background information. That shouldn't limit your examination of the design or of the location that you're examining. I hope that makes sense. So you just have to be careful about not limiting your perspective because you've seen what the type of crashes that occur there. Because as we know, sometimes there might be safety problems that exist at a location, but they might not yet have manifested themselves as crash data yet. So you have to be wary of that. Okay. Site visit, typically, and again, this is not something that we could do this quarter because we are not able to be on site. We are not able to go to the same site. I don't encourage site visits, multiple site visits. I could not do that this quarter. But typically, you want to visit the site at day and night conditions so you can look at different safety issues that manifest themselves at different times of day. The inspection is conducted concurrently with the review of documents mentioned previously. The site visit should include adjacent roadways that transition into the site. So that's another piece that you should be looking at. Not just look at the school site, but sort of try to see if you can go a little bit beyond that. The views of all potential road users, motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists should be incorporated into the review. That's something that typically was missing historically in how we did those audits. We always took motorist perspective, and that was sort of the dominant perspective, but that's not the way to do it. And again, making use of the focal point, if you can recall lessons from the human factors guidelines lecture, and then make sure that you do that. And then you should have a checklist when you do your inspection. So checklist or prompt list should be used so that you're sure that you are being comprehensive in your approach. Report safety deficiency and contain recommendations for corrective actions. So that's, I'm going to be able to see those. The recommendation focus on the direction of possible solution rather than indicating the exact nature of solution. So yeah, that's possible. So for example, you might recommend broader countermeasures because sometimes the agency team might not prefer to have the exact location because they might want to do their own cost and feasibility analysis. So the direction of possible solution, like increasing the visibility of crosswalk. So that usually is better. So you could talk about specific solution, but not recommend them. So recommendation should be, hey, why don't you look at speed management? And here are some ways to doing that, rather than saying, use this specific technique to reduce the speed at this particular location. So keeping it a little bit general is more beneficial so that the design team can then come in and have an open mind about what they want to do with it. All safety issues that require immediate attention should be identified. And then context matters, so because a lot of time you might be recommending a solution that might be cost prohibitive for the stage of the project or for that location. So it's always a good idea to have some low cost traffic safety solution that you can identify because they're most likely to be implemented. So you'll be able to get that started right away. Maybe sometimes these low cost measures might be interim measures. So that's perfectly fine. But starting with low cost measures, at least make sure that some action would occur rather than, a cost prohibitive measure that never gets implemented. So safety ratings, that's sort of like what the recommendation that, like you could do a frequency. And so this matrix shows like a frequency rating and a severity rating. So severity rating is if there is a safety risk that you identify at your location, would that lead to fender-bender type collisions, or could that lead to a motorist with vulnerable road user type collision that could potentially be, or that is more likely to be fatal? So sometimes, and this is just one way of doing that. So that's not something that we always have to do. And you probably noticed that in the case studies that I provided to you, a couple of case studies. So you could do that. I'm not particularly a fan of that particular type of rating, just because it can get very, very subjective. But you could think about this looking at frequency and severity is generally a good idea. So this A, B, C, D rating is not necessarily that you go after, right? Because I'm not, as I've said before in the class, that I'm not a huge fan of grading per se. And grades are not most important thing for me. But what is most important thing for me is that thinking about conflicts or potential crash risk in terms of how likely they are to occur. So frequency, looking at frequency and looking at severity. So looking at two things like frequency and severity is probably a good idea. So I hope this gives you some time to reflect on thinking about whether something that conflicts or potential safety issue that you identify, do they lead to more frequent or do they lead to uh, more severe? So for example, anything that's frequent and most severe. So generally speaking, even if you don't designate the grade, you want your site to not have frequent, very severe conflicts. So you never want to have an issue that sort of falls towards the top right of the framework. So you never want to have a location or that has safety issue that falls in this region of the chart, because that means there is a severe or extremely severe crash issue that's happening very frequently. So those example of that would be if there's a potential for conflict between pedestrian, especially child pedestrian, and motorist, or child bicyclist or bicyclist and motorist. So those conflicts will be really bad for a location. The conflicts that you don't really have to worry about, the rare conflicts that have low severity, right? But then, so bottom right is basically the conflicts that, that's not really a safety issue even. It's not a big safety issue. So as you move to the right and to the top, things becomes worse, right? So because they're frequent, so you could see rare, infrequent, occasional, frequent is the scale on the frequency side, and low severity to extreme severity is the scale on the severity rating. So as you go from bottom left to top right, things kind of become more severe and worse, because more severe and more frequent. So you never want to have a conflict that lies on the top right of this chart. Now, this exact designation, that's something that I'm not really worried about. But thinking about both frequency and severity of things would generally be helpful. And there are some case studies. I've provided the link on this thing. I think I noted a couple of case studies from the cities, from the urban areas that looked at pedestrian issues and commuter arterial and intersection improvements in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Tucson, Arizona. So those are the two that I've provided to you. But then there are you could look at state DOT study, county studies, and federal lands and tribal studies. So there are some example case studies that Federal Highway has provided that you could potentially look at if you end up ever doing a road safety audit at a location that fits within those things. And you could see this also sort of gives you an idea about what kind of roads are managed by what type of agencies. So state DOTs will typically typically maintain arterial roads, large arterial roads, major arterials, or major interstate highways, or even rural two-rail highways. So that's your DOT's level. Counties are sometimes managing two-lane type rural roads, or sometimes arterial roads. So there is some overlap between what counties manage and what state DOTs manage. And then cities typically manage arterials as well, but more urban type arterials. There's more higher ADT, higher congestion. Tribal lands are mostly rural roads, existing terrain. So that's the kind of roads the tribal agencies manage. And on federal lands, there could be national park, access to national park, and things like that. So, and then you could see there are different types of stages. So preliminary design, detailed design, conceptual design. You could look at planning stages. You could look at existing roads, completely existing roads. So road safety audit process could be conducted at any stage. And there are different ways of doing that at different stages. So these case studies could be very useful if you ever want to look at, like, now we were just doing a school zone case study. So there was nothing on this Federal Highway Administration chart that was directly applicable to us, but I think still had the two that I shared with you from Cincinnati, Ohio, and Tucson, Arizona, probably had some ideas that you could potentially look at. Okay. So that's all I wanted to talk about road safety audit, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentations. So without further ado, let me stop my chat and invite you guys to have any questions around road safety audit process and the work that you did. Are there any questions about that? Feel free to ask me a question by raising your hand or just typing up in chat. I'll give you a minute to look through those. Okay, go ahead, Megan, please.
Yeah, I was wondering how road safety audits are usually funded or like determined appropriate for different
Right.
locations.
So it could be part of the contracting process sometimes. So that's one way of doing that. And road safety audit is typically is not a real expensive part of it. So, and sometimes if you're doing it on the existing roads, those types of audits are typically done by cities and agencies. A lot of times they are in response to safety issues that have been pointed out by the by constituents. So a lot of times these road safety audits are conducted because there have been some citizen complaints on existing roads, especially. So if there are some citizen complaints, the city wants to respond to those complaints, but they're going to the site anyway. So they say like, okay, we're going to probably take up a road safety audit type process. Although so a lot of times cities will undertake that and have design teams sort of go out there, but that wouldn't quite fit the definition. So even though you're doing the job of a road safety audit, but it wouldn't quite fit the definition of it because the road safety audit is then not conducted by an independent agency. But sometimes, yeah, so if you're doing an existing roads and you're actually hiring independent experts, then those monies have to come from city funds or the community funds or whatever agency funds. But in some cases, when you're doing it on the preliminary design or detailed design stages, this could be part of the contract. Before, at different stages of the design, you'll have an independent review team look at this. So that's a good question. So again, it depends on what type of project you are doing. It either comes from the agency itself, or it could be part of the contracting process. And sometimes, because I wanted to kind of go over that process of how it's done in practice, sometimes it's done in practice where it doesn't quite meet the definition because the agency staff has to do that audit process by themselves because they're responding to some citizen complaints. So then they decide, okay, because we're responding to those citizen complaints, we're going to the field anyway. So why don't we look at the safety issues more comprehensively? So they undertake a process like the road safety audit, which is very similar, but technically doesn't fit the definition because the city staff is not an independent panel of experts.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question as well. Any other questions, please? Let me see if there's anything on chat. Nothing on chat either yet. So I will go ahead and stop recording now. And let me do this. So before you guys get started, because I have talked about all I wanted to talk about in the class. So, and again, you're gonna record. So let me just go ahead and stop recording for now. First.